So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my big pleasure to welcome on stage my two panelists for a very quick but intense panel discussion. First of all, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Hosugli Makiyama. He is the director of the European Center for International Political Economy and a leading author in two areas essential to this panel: trade diplomacy and the digital economy. His think tank has also published on the topic of discussion today, namely free flow of data. Warm welcome to the panel. And our second panelist is Mr. Niklaus Waser. He's Senior Vice President at MAN. We are glad to have a voice representing the business view in this discussion. As digitalization affects every business, MAN is a globally operating German firm, mostly known for its trucks, that is very active in the field of digital transformation. And before joining MAN this summer, Mr. Waser worked for IBM and left the IT company as head of strategic business development in Munich. A warm welcome also to you. So, yeah, we have time for a round of applause. So, every digital process requires the exchange of data, and modern international value chains, this means the cross-border movement of data is the decisive factor. The topic does not only affect the IT sector, but every sector facing digital transformation. And allowing transnational data flows calls for the adequate regulatory frameworks. So let me start with asking that. Why is it so important for companies to move data across countries? And Mr. Waser, I would like to start with you. You're working for an international company, so you know all the challenges that comes along with that. You know all the challenges that come with the digital transformation. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about which kind of data is crucial for MAN to share across borders.
So, as you all know, the truck business is not maybe as simple as it seems. So it's not just loading stuff somewhere, driving and unloading. So a truck and transportation is part of an end-to-end supply chain, and so we have many involved parties in this end-to-end process. So it's not just that a driver takes a paper and drives from A to B. And in this context, information between the different parties, and we have 20, 30 parties just for one transport being involved, to have all the information being shared. This is crucial for the transport and logistics business. Just a very simple example, everyone wants to know what is the requested time of arrival of a truck, of a transport, what is the estimated time of arrival, and what is the actual time of arrival. So this is very simple, but if I want to run such a process very efficient, very smooth, we need to have data, and not just data which is produced while driving. This is data which is produced while running this process, and this process is not a national process. So we are transporting goods and material across Europe and worldwide. So the data we need to run this process from a logistics system perspective is needed where the central logistics system is placed, and so we need to transfer the data so that everybody knows in this process what is going on, what happened, and what is the next step so that the process is running.
Absolutely. Mr. Lee Makiyama, when policymakers speak about the free flow of data, that seems to be kind of abstract to me. Can you tell us a little bit more about which data we are really talking about?
I think really that my co-panelists explained it extremely well. Because in the end, what we are talking about is the right to use our IT system when we export and go abroad. I just happen to know that, for example, in the manufacturing sector in Germany, connectivity and data and software account for about 5% of the inputs, the 5% of the cost. Now, if 10 countries are asking German exporters to replicate these functions locally in their economies, it basically means that the foreigners have taken away half of your turnover. So it basically means the right to stay in business, as far as I'm concerned. And now we are increasingly using IT and data and software in order to stay competitive. German SMEs need the platforms and access to actually retail space online in order to sell in other countries. German banks can develop algorithms to understand investment patterns in markets they may not know in Asia. In the same way, a German auto manufacturer needs to collect data in, for example, in Japan in order to make sure that their cars are just as good as Toyota's. This is very, very simple stuff. And this is, if that's the reality of business, there's also a reality for finance ministers. We have to face the fact that actually almost 50% of German services export is depending on connectivity and data. That means about 280 billion euros of Germany's export is actually depending on connectivity. And that actually, the overseas markets like China, India, and Russia keep our markets open for our right to use data across borders. That also actually entails that, to be frank, if the overseas market decide to shut down, they can actually turn German trade surplus to zero simply by shutting off the data. This is the reality we are living in.
And actually, we have to deal with that right now. So let's talk about another big topic, about the localization of the data. When regulation requires companies to locate certain data within national boundaries, these restrictions can be burdensome for the affected companies. We heard about that. Data localization requirements exist in different states worldwide. We're talking about China, India, Russia, Vietnam, just to name a few of them. Mr. Lee Makiyama, which obstacles for the cross-border data flow exist today, and which companies are especially affected? You kind of mentioned that. And can you name us some concrete examples where transnational data flows were hindered?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the problem is that many of these data localization requirements are hidden in very benevolent packaging, which means that they are hidden as personal information laws, financial security laws, and it could sometimes even be cybersecurity laws. So if I'm just going to take one example amongst, let's say, around 80 countries in the world that are imposing some kind of condition on moving data, and most of them are good safeguards in order to make sure that citizens and corporate assets are protected. But in some cases, for example, in China, you are required to localize almost everything. And since every data transmission contains information about users, and it could be metadata, IP addresses, it could sometimes be phone numbers, employee ID, which means that basically the government has almost discretionary unlimited power to take a business out and to say that you are not welcome here. And in addition to data localization, you also have licensing requirement, meaning that if for some reason the Chinese government feels that, no, this German company is too strong competitor to our state-owned enterprises, that means that they will not going to issue the license to collect data inside China. We are not even moving data out. It's actually their right to actually know a little bit more about their customers, to be able to keep their phone and email addresses. It's not that advanced. And this basically means that with combination of some of the governments also being able to extract data from German companies, which they feel very uncomfortable about, that creates a very dangerous environment to operate in.
Such a huge topic. Let's talk about MAN. How are trucks affected by data localization?
So for the truck itself, it's quite simple. So all the data produced or created by the truck is stored in the truck normally. But if you want to run this truck business, so you need to know the position of the truck, you need to know the condition of the truck. To go for predictive maintenance as an example, so you need to know by when do you need to fuel the truck, by when do you need to repair something, run maintenance. And so this is not what you need just located within the truck. So you need to transfer and transmit it to a system to manage the fleet, so that you know, okay, this truck has a range to go for of 200 kilometers left, so you know, okay, the next drop point needs to be in this range. And so this is, from a truck itself, it's quite simple, but on the back of the truck you have good and material, and also there you have more often than you expect. You have sensors, you create data, and also this is very important to understand by when is my material where. And also this information, this data needs to be stored somewhere, needs to be transferred to somewhere, to a system, so that you can use the data. So it's all about the data you use to make the business efficient and to run the business successful. And so many parties you have in this process. It's not just the truck, it's not just the vehicle, and even if you think about autonomous vehicles as a next step, you need to have exchange of data, of information between the vehicles, so that every vehicle knows what is the other one doing. And so this is how to run this ecosystem at all. This is just based on data. And you need to have this flow of data between the participants of this ecosystem. And it's not just the vehicle itself. The vehicle is just one small, but maybe important, and I hope important piece in the system.
Absolutely crucial, especially for the upcoming future. Let's use the last minutes of this debate to talk about more about the international policy debate going on. The G20 ministerial statement of trade and the digital economy of 2019, as well as the Osaka leaders' declaration under Japanese presidency, includes the topic data free flow with trust. The EU has a regulatory framework in place ensuring the free flow of data within the EU. So, Mr. Waser, if you could write a wish list right now to our politicians, what do they have to do to improve the situation for your business, for all businesses?
So, for our business, and let's not talk about the truck business, but the transportation and logistics business at all, for us it's very important that we have clear rules and guidelines we can use across borders. It does not make sense that we have in one country these rules and regulations, and in another country we have different ones. So a truck is crossing borders, the material is crossing borders, and it makes no sense from a business perspective to every border you cross, you need to behave different with the data you have, with the data you need, you create, you store. And so this is the biggest wish we have, that we have really clear regulations, clear guidelines, clear answers, how to handle the data. So it should not be an open playground. Everybody can do whatever he wants or she wants with the data. It needs to be clear and regulated somehow. But this is what we need from the politics, as the free flow of data is crucial for us. As in a plant, it's very simple. You have just one place and you have a production line. Here you have no free flow of data need. But if you go out on the street and run the business on the street, then you need to have some data you manage your process with, and you need to have for this the specific regulations.
Mr. Lee Makiyama, how do you evaluate the G20 principles, and maybe what's on your mind for the upcoming Declaration 2020?
Well, first of all, I think the Japanese presidency, with actually the cooperation with the German presidency that was 2 years prior, has really, really cracked the code. When we're talking about free flow with trust, you're basically talking about there has to be a balance. So if you're a like-minded country, if we can trust the jurisdiction, if we can believe that the other side will offer you legal assistance, they can offer you good environment for your personal information, that means that we can let everything flow. And that is really a question about conditionality. And this is an assessment that we need to make. And I think also at the same time, in parallel to the discussion we are having in G20, Europe is also going its own way. We have invented GDPR, which is a wonderful instrument for protecting our fundamental rights. But my criticism is actually relatively minor, but it's a consequence of this. It protects fundamental rights, but it does not protect corporate assets. We already know that the cyber espionage accounts for about 55 billion euros per year in lost corporate assets from European companies. It will cost about 300,000 jobs, lost job opportunities across Europe. We need to make sure that we also protect corporate assets in the same way. The second question is actually, does privacy stop us from negotiating trade agreements? Absolutely not. Trade agreements are not designed to renegotiate privacy, but they are made to make sure that the other side doesn't impose trade barriers using privacy as an excuse. So this is the reason why we should never, ever ask for more exceptions in trade agreements than we need. Currently, the EU trade agreements contain provisions that will excuse China, Indonesia, Vietnam. We don't need this safeguard. We only need to make sure that the GDPR is, well, accepted by the trade agreements, but we should never, as a result of this, accept hidden trade barriers on the other side.
So in your point of view, can the EU play in any kind of way a role model in the international context?
Well, as an Asian who has actually chosen to become a European, Europe will always be a role model. And in this context, of course, you know, the wonderful German industry innovation is going to be a role model within Europe. That's true. And this is the reason why we shouldn't be afraid. We don't need to fear Americans or the Chinese. We can actually do quite a lot on our own. And we are winning in every other step of the value chain. And this is also another reason why we should never ask for more protection than we need.
Same goes to you, Mr. Weiser. What do you think? Can the EU be a kind of role model?
I think the EU is already for decades a role model in many businesses. And if you look at the international exchanges of experience, competence and so on, in the past many companies, many business areas have been looking to the US. Today, many are looking more to the east, but to look at ourselves, I think it's the most important because we have what we need. We just need to use it, and I think this is what is one of the most important next steps from the EU perspective, from the politics perspective, but also from the business perspective. So I think yes, the EU and especially in the EU, Germany can be a role model. We just need to take it.
Wonderful. Mr. Weiser, Mr. Lee Makiyama, thank you very, very much for this very quick but also very intense panel. Like less than 20 minutes, we made it. Wonderful. I think at the end of the day, we kind of have to deal with these digital walls. But for me, and I think also for the audience, this panel made it much better to understand what's going behind the scenes and to get more insights about the whole discussion. And the good thing is the international debate is going on. So cross fingers for us and for you. And once again, thank you very much for all your insights. And this is your applause.